Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Bryan,
morning.
CEO of Red, Chris, COO of Red, joining us today. And today we're going to talk about IT again, but a very important aspect of IT, which is you hear companies say, and it's quite dangerous, when to say, nothing's broken. Or maybe I should say in a more neutral accent, nothing is broken.
I like the first one.
Yeah, nothing's broken. Right, so companies, potential leaders, they come in, people log in, works fine, computer works fine, the system runs, the business continues, nothing's broken, right? That creates a false sense of stability and of safety, right? Because you just don't see what's going on in the background, and the wheels are turning. You don't know if they're turning effectively, but it's a dangerous signal, right? Just to take that as fact. Nothing's broken, therefore everything works. They're not equals. So why does stability create confidence is the first question.
I think this is an interesting question. Because for IT businesses, there's a lot more dependence on that IT, right? So you do need to be thinking proactively around what you want to do around your IT, what's happening in the background. For example, in a managed services provider, we're so reliant on our IT and integrations from our tooling and monitoring and whatever may be, that it is core to operations. But for other businesses, when someone comes in the morning, logs in, and they can log into their computer fine, that might not be as operationally focused for them. So in that scenario, nothing is broken. Maybe you can go about and do 90% of what you need to for the day. And I think having that lens is kind of important for the conversation we're having here around, do we want to talk more generally about businesses and their IT or IT heavy businesses? Because they do have different weightings that we need to apply to them, right? So if you're an IT heavy business and you just consider stability, everything working fine as the norm and okay, then you might be missing out on where are the efficiencies, what are the hidden gaps, what are the things that aren't working well that will improve your bottom line, right? How can you improve your gross margin overall? Are people doing things offline that they could be doing online at a more efficient way? Then it becomes a much bigger problem. But if you are in a less IT dependent environment, then it is okay to some extent to say nothing's broken. I want to be reactive strategically. I don't want to spend all my time thinking about how can I improve my IT and how can I improve aspects of that IT if it doesn't drive much to the bottom line. And that's a strategic lens that the business owners need to apply.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The other thing to consider, though, is how many canaries you have in the mine. So if your only kind of leading indicator that something might be afoot is that people can log in and work, you could be missing something that's slowly burning in the background that will become a catastrophic problem if it's not kind of monitored or actioned or remediated in time. Just because there's that old funny saying, it's like, my IT is always working. What do I need you for? To the IT provider, and then the flip side is that nothing works. What do I use you for? And it can be very easy to fall into either trap, right? But it is important to note that just like a car, your car can run for 10, 20, 30, 40,000 kilometers without needing anything done to it other than fuel until all of a sudden it doesn't, and then everything stops working and everything breaks and. You got to put your foot on the brake and the car doesn't slow down like it used to. It starts making funny noises, and that's because nothing has been maintained. And IT is no different. There's patches that come out every month. There's updates, new software that comes out. Shadow IT is another major issue. You can have staff running around using tools that aren't sort of approved by the organization that creates data leakage potentially. There's a lot of things that are also at play beyond just does it work every day. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the car is a great example, right? You don't change your oil, suddenly your engine's going to clog. But you can't see the oil while you're driving, so nothing's broken, right? You can't see the brake pads until you can't brake, right? Nothing's broken. And IT, I think even more dangerously so than driving a car, because when you drive a car, people aren't actively trying to crash into you, is a good assumption.
You've been driving in Brisbane?
Yes, and not super impressed.
I wouldn't be either. It's pretty bad.
No. But we could record a whole podcast about traffic. Maybe we will. But yeah, people are not actively trying to crash into you, or let's assume so when you drive a car, unless you're on bumper cars. But when you're in IT, people are actively trying to crash into your system. So it's even more important that you maintain it.
Yeah, look, from a cybersecurity perspective, definitely.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's all those hidden metrics and monitors that you don't really see. And it's about surfacing those.
Yeah.
So if you've got the right kind of reporting, if you've got the right kind of monitoring in place, if you've got the right kind of lens that surfaces up to the executive team, then you're not really saying that, oh, nothing's broken, so we don't have to do anything. You're saying we have an active view that nothing is amiss.
Yeah.
We're seeing all the right numbers. We're seeing all the right colors on those. We're getting greens across the board for the key metrics that we want to manage, keep an eye on, maintain quarterly, monthly, whatever the cadence might be. And then you're already taking an active role in managing that IT risk. So you're leaps and bounds ahead of just saying, all right, I can log on, or I'm not getting an error when I try to do XYZ task. And that is further ahead than a lot of businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about risk, right? Because let's relate it to something that potentially everybody understands as a project, right? Projects usually have RAG statuses, red, amber, and green. Green obviously going well. Red needs some intervention, let's say. When you run a project, and let's say any business runs projects, right, of different natures, you keep an eye on those metrics. You keep an eye on things. And if suddenly something goes from green to amber, you pay attention. If from amber to green, you pay less attention, perhaps because you've done something. But let's say something goes red, you hands on deck, right? So what can we do here? IT, or let's say people's IT, regardless of the business you're in, doesn't usually have those metrics, doesn't usually have those colors. So therefore, how do you know things are going well, right? And this is what we talk about, risk accumulating quietly.
Yeah, so part of that too is also, humans are naturally adverse to, confrontation in most cases. So if they find something that's not really working properly, they'll usually figure out a way around it, or they'll just kind of ignore it until it becomes so problematic or so impacting in their day-to-day that then it's a massive issue.
Yeah.
And by that time, they've kind of stewed on it for a while, right? So it's important to make sure that we're not just assuming everything's going well because no one's whinging yet. And that's important to get that feedback at every level of the organisation. If you're just speaking to the executive, you're going to get a very siloed view of what IT might be like because they potentially are not interacting with it nearly as heavily as, say, a frontline worker is. So ensuring that your organisation is testing and surveying the staff to make sure that, how do you find IT? How's your computer? How is your day-to-day tasks hindered or helped by IT?
So how do you surface that a non-IT heavy organization, right? So from an MSP perspective, tickets come in. I mean, we can see what's happening on the ground, but for those business owners that have a managed services partner, they might not. They don't see the flow of tickets. They don't know who's raising what day to day, and they may or may not be involved in, say, the monthly cadence where your provider might go through those tickets and say, we had X number of tickets. We're seeing trends in ABC. But let's imagine you're the owner of a business, or you're running a business that doesn't have a managed service provider. Maybe you're on the slightly smaller end, and you are taking that approach of nothing's broken, so I don't have to do anything on the IT front. How would you get a feel for what is actually happening on the ground there?
Yeah, my very, very strong opinion on this is a people challenge, not an IT challenge, right? It's just like any other tool, If you've got a delivery driver and his car's a piece of shit and it's constantly having issues for him and he's not making his routes on time, that's a problem, just like IT could be a problem for anyone as well. So it just needs to be part of your cadence around your people, so your quarterly reviews, your one-on-one check-ins, and asking just how are your tools? How's everything that you use for your job day to day? Is there anything that's causing you grief that we need to know about? And it could be car, could be tool, could be IT, could be the coffee machine, it could be anything. But incorporating that into your constant feedback loop with all your staff is critical. And we've helped plenty of organisations do that and kind of go, here's a good starting point. Just start asking these questions, when you're talking to your people, because that's the only way you're going to get it. You're not going to get it unless you force it out of them. Yeah.
Let's talk about why it's dangerous as well, right? And let's mention AC Labs, right? First fine that was issued, a couple of million, potentially more, 5 million or so. They either had the visibility or didn't have the visibility but failed to act upon it. And as a consequence, they got fined twice, right? Plus having to pay ransom, plus losing data, plus reputational damage, and something that could have potentially taken them half an hour a week, if they were looking at it proactively, turned into thousands of hours of effort and damages and business loss and things like that. So what do you do, right? AC Labs got fined. They got fined hugely, massively, right? And then on top of that, they lost a bunch of clients, bunch of business. Hard to think that a business can recover from that.
It's a tricky one, right? There was a lack of oversight in certain areas, or maybe there wasn't enough importance paid to certain things. That wasn't privy to the discussions they had at an officer level or a board level, but ultimately they weren't looking at the right metrics, right? The right things weren't being surfaced to them to say, or hopefully the right things weren't being surfaced to them. And it wasn't that they were ignoring things that were being surfaced to them. But a lot of that fine came down to them not taking appropriate steps to secure things from a cyber perspective. But that's still just one of the aspects of IT that you want to be keeping an eye on. You know, is it working? Is it working well? Is it going to work to protect us from a cyber incident? Is it going to work to continue to provide continuity when we have, you know, maybe a physical incident in the building, or on site, or whatever it might be? All of those questions need to be asked more broadly across your IT.
Yep.
To say, have we got what's fit for our purpose? And it was an unfortunate example for ACL. But there's so many of those out in the market. They just happen to be the first one to have been hit with a fine related to not acting in the way they should around that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And executives have to resign and all these things. And it's not a nice story, right? But I'd be very surprised if they would be the last one. Right? They were certainly
Absolutely
the first.
Yeah. First one made an example of for sure, but there'll be many more. You know, we've had Optus, we've had Medicare, we've had all sorts of massive companies that have had similar, challenges, and that will continue to be the case because, look, even the best intentions, right, can still be tough if you're not getting the right advice, or you just have someone that's in a position that's not acting as diligently as potentially they could. So it is important to have those constant feedbacks and to have that right lens and surface that right information to the executives so they can always be making, the right decisions with the information they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Optus, I know from a bit of insider here, but Optus had to get budget from other places in the business and they killed the marketing budget for a couple of years. They had zero marketing, zero publicity once they had the incident because they just could not afford it. And, what does that do down the line? You're just losing market share, you're losing clients. And the recovery is not nearly as quick as the fall.
Yeah, you have to make tough decisions then, right? You have to sacrifice on that particular spend. Maybe they could have got away with having some of their marketing budget, but they needed to spend it on other things. And that was probably the catalyst that made them go, okay, let's reinvest into other aspects, ideally in the IT sector, and in their infrastructure, and in their management of upstream or downstream supply and vendor risk.
Yeah.
And that's just necessary when you're making decisions off the back of an issue or an event.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where IT is not resilient. And as a matter of fact, action is reactive instead of proactive. So let's move on to failures, being the first visible warning, right? So when problems appear, it's usually because something's failed. If something's failed, it is red, P0, number one priority, call it whatever you want. But that's when you have to put hands on decks. But it's too late, right? It's too late. Something's happened. Something's failed.
Yeah, so the problem you've got there is you've no longer got control of the situation anymore, not full control. You're having to pull resources off things that, are proactive or, driving the business. And now they're having to look in the rearview mirror and figure out what's going on and fix it. And often, businesses, particularly, less mature ones, will kind of throw everyone at the same problem because it's a big problem. And, I've seen that many times in my career where, one of your big customers has a major problem and all of a sudden you're grabbing every wizard from every corner of the office to try and solve this problem, and you've still got a bunch of other customers, right? So it's important to really be clear in those instances and those events, who's accountable for what, who's doing what, because you don't want everyone trying to do the same thing because then chaos ensues, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, predictive failure or predictive analysis is so important. You don't want to be in that situation where you're having to, rally the troops to fix something that you should have known about. Should have been warning signals, those canaries in the miners.
Indeed. So let's, and one thing that I like saying basically is something happens, your failure occurs, you're going to have to look in the rearview mirror set and put in place all the measures anyway that you should have put in place to start with, but it's going to cost you more You're going to have to do it more rushed. It's going to be more difficult. You're going to have to neglect your clients. Had you done it in the first place, it would have been a lot smoother. You know, that transformation, that transition, whatever you want to call it, becomes easier. But now you're going to have to do it anyway. And as a matter of fact, you lose negotiating power because you cannot afford not to do it now. You cannot afford not to fix it. And it just becomes very, very difficult. And potentially you're forcing this onto the people, onto the business, when you could have very much do it from a, you know, proper change management perspective.
Yeah, look, I think that's interesting, right? Because to some extent, that assumes that you knew about it before it was going to happen, right? So if you did and you knew you had to do those things and you chose not to do those things and then something happened, then you're forced to do that. And then you should be looking back and, you know, kicking yourself because that was dumb. But that's negligent, right? In many of these scenarios, you knew you had to do it, you were aware of it, and you didn't.
Yeah.
That's very different to the very first signal being something went wrong. Then you're looking back and saying, okay, let's learn from that lesson and let's put it in place now. Sure, you're still constrained. You got to do it faster. There's more risk. It's a worse time to do it. But you know, the key question is, how can we know about it before, so that we can, you know, if we choose to be negligent and not do anything about it, we could do that, or we could do something in advance. And I think that's the trick, right? If you're not IT savvy, if you're not heavily dependent on your IT, if it isn't something that you think about every day because it's core to your business, why would you think about it prior to an incident?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's why it's so common that this is how it plays out. Nothing happens, there's silence, everything seems fine, then there's an issue. You're offline for a day. People can't do what they need to, you lose revenue, and then suddenly you start thinking about that problem. And I think that's very difficult. I think that's difficult, especially for smaller businesses that aren't IT heavy.
Yeah, in particular when businesses at all sizes always have what's most important and right in front of them right now. And to your point, if IT is not a huge part of that, very rarely will it be at the front of your mind, I suppose.
I have an IT background. We've come from IT. We've been doing that for decades. So it seems foreign that people wouldn't think about IT as part of their, you know, BAU and as part of business operations. But I think it is sad that people don't now, given everything we know about how the world works, make that a priority in their business, even if it isn't something core to, you know, their operational model.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that to not a greater extent, but it's more publicized at the moment. It's cybersecurity falls in the same bucket, right?
Yeah.
Like we think, you know, you should be thinking about that, and from design, everything you do, you should be thinking about what's from a security perspective, from a cyber and a physical security perspective. Why are we doing this? How are we doing this? But I don't think people do that naturally either, unless it's a core part of their business or they've had an incident. So it's really about getting the right mechanisms in place so that it just becomes part of your norm, part of your BAU, part of your monthly reporting, that you're going to have some metrics on IT. And they might be as simple as what we were talking about before, where we just go, hey, let's do a survey once a month to go, has anyone had major problems with their tooling and their IT and our systems, just to get something to start with if you're the smaller size business. If you're a larger size organization, you need bigger frameworks, more structure, so that information filters from the ground all the way up and you actually get a useful metric to look at, something on a scorecard. And that's the first step to at least being able to say, we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, something odd's happening, we can see it in numbers and it's happening regularly. And that's the only way you're really going to get some kind of warning in advance of an incident to say, hey, we should do something about this particular piece before it becomes a problem. And cyber's just one aspect of that, but it is a very front of mind one at the moment.
Absolutely.
And should stay that way.
Yeah. So it's not only about keeping things running, it's about not falling behind really as well. So funny story, well, not funny for them, but a funny story for others potentially is in the past when I was in London, architecture company used to actually get a lot of business, right? And then suddenly they started losing business to competitors, potentially smaller competitors, let's say more or less equal size. And they went back and asked why are we not getting this business? They actually went to their clients and they did the right thing, you know, proactively seeking feedback. Well, a lot of people, and especially architects, but a lot of businesses do office tours before they sign contracts. Their IT and their computers were just not state of the art. They just were not old. And for a business where that matters so much, you know, you could have things running, your computer might run and your architecture software might run, but those guys are better. You know, they can take changes on better. They're potentially a bit more secure. They have the latest software. Yeah, they might be a bit newer, a bit smaller, but they have a better setup. So I'm going to go with them.
Just the visuals, it looked like they knew
Yeah,
Like they were in sync with their IT. Got
Yeah.
dashboard and
They were in
TVs on
sync.
the wall.
they were in sync with their IT. You know, in a company where IT
Interesting.
doesn't necessarily matter, but they work digitally, like every company does now.
It's
So-
like anything. Document that looks good, you're likely to want to read it. Food that looks good, you eat with your eyes. It's the same with anything. You do an office tour and there's, green gingham patterns on the walls and mismatching orange carpet and old monitors and, it's all mismatched IT. That's an immediate sign that people are just not thinking proactively about a number of items, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's,
Perception is a big, big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, as I said, it's not only to keep the wheels turning, but it's also not falling behind. And something that you might implement today might be outdated tomorrow, especially with, how quickly updates and new softwares and programs are coming. And the reason why they're coming is because there's a need for it, not because it's just saturating the market. Okay, let's move to what you mentioned, which is I am a small business. I am potentially a leader of a business, not necessarily small, medium size, large size. I now want to look at this. I'm going to give another example. Let's say we all more or less know somebody who's bought a house, who's trying to buy a house, or you've heard rumors of somebody buying a house. Before you buy it, one of the most critical steps you do is you get it surveyed. And if you don't, you're a fool. Right? So you might not see under the ground, but there might be structural issues. You might not see on top of the roof when you view it, but the gutters might be clogged or broken, and that's going to create damp and mold, et cetera, et cetera. You hire somebody, right? Because we're not all structural engineers, let's say.
Definitely not.
They look at it and they tell you what it's wrong. Now, you want to fix it, you want to buy it, you want to do something about it, that's up to you. But I guess the analogy here is you don't have to do this alone, right? There is services, tech reviews, whatever you want to do, that are out there that are very cost effective, that can look at it for you and tell you, this is everything that's wrong. You don't have to look at 100 things, but if you fix these 4 or 5, you're in a good shape. So
yeah, look, that's a good way to start that ball rolling too. Right? You can bring someone in to do a bit of an assessment, and there's how long is a piece of string component to it. You could spend days and days and days digging into things, so you can do something reasonably cost effective that has good coverage that'll give you some initial starting point, and that might form the basis for what are we going to measure, what are we going to add to that monthly scorecard or reporting pack that we look at as an executive team or a board. And that is a really good way to start getting that information, and that can cover interviews and talking to people on the ground to get their feedback, and it can also be reasonably easy from a tooling perspective. There's lots out there that'll be able to, with the right permission, just scan and pick up any of those key risk areas or any of those key gaps and say, hey, we ran this scan, it didn't return the result we wanted. That means you probably need to think about this type of project in the future, but it will start to get that visibility. And again, you don't want to wait until after there's an incident to do something like that, but you do want to do a bit of planning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Same way you don't want to wait for your house to fall on top of you before you start fixing it.
That's true. Yeah. There's good money to fork out that might prevent use of bad money.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So 4 things leadership should be included. Agree or disagree? Let's go one by one. Independent resilience validation. So this is an expert.
Is that one thing or is that 3 things?
No, that's one.
That's one thing.
Yeah, one thing. Independent validation, right? So
Yeah, look, I think the second part is more important than the first necessarily. You need some form of validation, some form of quantification of what you're looking at. Independent is good, especially if you're a little bit too tunnel vision on your own business, or if you're the one, when you step back, you realize, I haven't been thinking about IT because I don't care about IT, then independent is definitely important. But I think keep it validation. You need to be measuring something, and looking at something that you validate as a useful measure.
Yeah. Number 2, risk visibility.
Yeah, so there's much like the scans, the tools that can find, infrastructure layer issues or technical issues, then there's the security aspect as well. I think it's important, and a very simple way of doing that is, you're aligning to a framework, and that can be very easy to do. So Essential 8 is, what the Australian Signals Directorate kind of professed to be a good standard, and there's got different layers within that Essential 8 framework. If you're looking at things through that lens, you're already going to be leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of other businesses that are not looking at that with a serious view. And they're simple things like, are you doing regular backups? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Are your systems being patched regularly? So they're super complicated, need to be a CISO to understand what's going on. They are simple implementations you can do in your business that are going to really support the business from being ahead of most.
Amazing. Number 3, regular recovery testing.
Yeah, all well and good to have all these things in place and have visibility and expect it to work when you need it, but yeah, you got to test it. And that often falls through the cracks. I mean, if we think about how immature a lot of businesses are on this journey, just thinking about IT risks, thinking about cybersecurity risks, having some kind of reporting is already a great step in the right direction. And I can see why a lot of them then go, okay, I think we're good. The reports are all looking good. Let's move on to the next thing, the next problem, something that might feel bigger. And then you forget about the testing. It's super common, but you have to regularly test. And that doesn't mean test everything or, turn off your business for a day. Think about what is a useful test to do that's relevant to your business, right? If everyone is, if you're email driven, heavily email driven, right? Let's say you want to test the scenario where what if you can't access those in the way you normally can? What if, for whatever reason, you get a mass deletion event? Can you use your backups to get access to those emails again? Do you have backups, I'd assume, initially? And then you test them. Can you actually use them? Can you restore them? Can you get people working again? But pick something relevant. It doesn't have to be.
I love the story, but I'm going to give you another story on this one because you said email driven. Do you guys know what the NHS is?
Yep.
Okay. For those who don't, potentially is the Medicare of the UK, right? Simple. Very email driven because everything has to put into notes. Very secured email. You can't actually email anybody outside the NHS domain when you email, right? You have to use specific domain, and that's great. But there was a function on the email where somebody wrote an email and it was email all in the NHS. 40,000, 50,000 people crashed their email. And because people didn't really know what to do with it, they started getting reply alls. Please remove me from this chain.
Oh dear.
Please remove me from this chain. And that happened hundreds of times out of 40,000 people, right? Take 1%, 2% of people doing that. The NHS went to a standstill for about a week because people's emails were not working. It was loading, crashing. I need to see that patient. Critical, urgent care. What does this past note say?
Good
a
day.
week, man, of the UK, 60 million people. Because they were email focused. And I see how this is
That's
funny.
a hard
At the same
one to
time, it's
test.
horrible.
Wild
Right?
that they are using email, which was invented as a short memo service to store medical information.
Right, but we all use email. Medicare surely use emails.
I'm sure
right?
they do, yeah.
They also have their systems to store notes, but that's it. It crashed. 40,000 people, employees, millions of people on your waiting list. Horrendous event.
It's a tough one to test.
Yeah, it's a tough one to test. But
That's load testing, right? That's kind of, that's super tricky.
yeah,
But what you want to be able to do is then, if you've got to metaphorically pull the plug, let's say you're super old school and you still have email servers, Exchange servers, and that problem is,
It's been a while.
is still occurring, then in theory, you switch them off and try to short circuit the problem. And then you go, all right, let's go back and see what we can recover from our last backups and then start from fresh again, rebuild it. A little bit harder when it's all in the cloud. You kind of got to let it run its course to some extent. Or maybe there are ways to short circuit that I'm not aware of, but you probably got to call in the big guns there.
Yeah, they definitely have mechanisms for that at their end.
You'll be talking directly to the providers and Microsoft, whoever hosts your email and being like, hey.
Yeah, give Bill a call. He'll sort you out.
yeah. And talking about number 4 then, a documented incident response plan.
That should be broad enough that it covers all kinds of incidents. There should be an element of that for cyber.
Yeah.
And some people think about that with that cyber lens predominantly, but it should be looking at what types of incident are most likely to affect your business, what way does it affect your business, and then what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And if you start with that as a template, again, another good way to make sure you're looking at the right things, because you can have that conversation and you can have it with a partner who can help with that conversation, but it helps you start to think about what if this thing goes down, what if that thing goes down, and that might be the little thought bubble that starts you down the path saying, all right, we should measure this thing. We should get someone to build us a report that says, how is this tracking every month? And we look at it because we know we're going to need to do something associated with recovery if there's an incident of that nature.
Yeah.
And it might be as simple as, can we hotspot off our phones? Or, if there's a flood event, can we store our goods somewhere nearby that's slightly higher?
Can you take me higher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a good starting point.
And it's important to note too, incident response plans are not exclusively for cyber incidents, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of stuff, like you just mentioned, flood, fire, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a big one here in Brisbane.
It is. People very quickly these days are focusing on the cyber ones and forgetting what happens if someone runs a backhoe through the fibre. Can you hotspot? Or are you in one of those wonderful buildings in Brisbane that just happens to get a dead zone and you can't actually hotspot and you haven't thought about it?
Yeah.
My
Just
house.
simple things, right?
Yeah.
And
I
it's
live in
not- it's not always-
Chermside and, Telstra is supposed to be the best coverage in the world. There's a dead spot in my house for one of the major providers 14 kilometres from the city. So don't assume that it's going to be available.
Yeah, absolutely. I have within a kilometre of me a 5G tower, right? They look like weird cactus trees, right? For those who don't know what they look like. But, less than a kilometre away, and there's places in my house where I get no signal. So don't assume. And I think the assumption here, the mistake is that an incident response plan doesn't have to be a 200-page business
And nor should it
plan.
be.
Nor should it be,
Nor
right?
should it be. It
And
should be
as a
very
matter-
simple.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, to an extent, you can use some cookie cutting techniques, right? If you bring somebody who knows what they're doing, who's seen this before, because incidents tend generally to repeat themselves in nature, or can be, the same for various businesses, and you can take that and adapt it to your own. So it doesn't have to be difficult, but you don't want people running around like headless chickens once a failure happens.
No, the biggest thing is just to get clarity on who's got to do what.
Yeah.
The complexity in the technical side, most businesses will have partners that'll execute that, but it's about who's got what
Indeed.
aspect of that response plan.
And it's not just IT.
No.
I think we have a tendency to think IT because that's where we sit. But your incident response plan is any type of incident. Like if you're a medical practice and you've got physical access restrictions, if there's a flood event or something, right, and people can't get to your practice, how are you going to manage that incident from just communicating to potential patients and thinking about how are they checking in? Can you move to telehealth? There's often technology related solutions to them, but you need to think about problems that are not tech dependent.
Yeah, hospitals are a great example. What happens if electricity goes off in a hospital? Well, number one is usually a diesel backup generator, right? But what happens, right? Well, somebody has to go and fire it up.
Think
or
about it.
somebody
Go
has-
through the process, right? And see what it highlights around actually we don't know what we do there, or actually we need a backup there. Or actually the strategic move could be, we're going to acknowledge that risk, but we're not going to do anything about it because the mitigation options are way too expensive. We think we could probably survive without, so we make a conscious decision to say, we've talked about the risk, we're acknowledging that we're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah. And listen, it's super simple. One that we all have in place is a fire alarm plan. Your fire alarm goes off. There's one person who's a fire warden who goes, everybody out and don't use the lift, take the stairs and let's meet at the car park or whatever designated point is.
And
And
what do we do?
everybody knows.
What do we do when they're working from home that one day
Yeah.
that the fire alarm goes off, which Murphy says is going to happen every time?
Yeah.
It
Who's
is,
your
yeah.
backup fire warden?
Well, listen, not a bad day for the person from home if there is a fire. It's pretty good day to choose to work from home. But yeah, listen, you're right. But that is a simple example, your minimum requirements, right?
Yep.
That is 3-4 pages. 3-4 lines, 3-4 bullet points. Fire warden puts his hat on, everybody out, meet by the muster point. That's it.
Interestingly, far more important when you're on the 40th floor of a building as opposed to the first.
Yeah, get a cool slide.
I take the fire. Not sure.
Get the company helicopter on the roof.
Just get a cool slide. Go all the
Pretty
way
sure,
down.
Think if it's in your plan. Go.
Yeah, it's in your plan.
pretty sure Flight Centre had a slide in their office at one point. They may still do.
Yeah, some places do. Some places do. Well, listen, thank you very much for your insight today. If anybody listening to this is not too sure where to start, reach out. We can point you in the right direction. Next time, we're going to be talking about how one single outage has wiped out some businesses for months. That's an interesting one.
Scary.
Indeed. Great.
Thanks, guys.
Speak to you next time.
See ya.
Peace.